I just say we are so glad you are here and a part of this community of leaders who want to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways. Today, we're tackling a hard topic. At least it feels like a hard topic to me, but also such an important one, the topic of failure. Now, when I say failure, what feeling does that prick inside of you? Do you feel your stomach drop a bit, or does it bring up a past experience to mind? Or maybe it's even one of your greatest fears. For me, failure actually makes my stomach kind of hurt. In all honesty, it makes me feel like I've disappointed somebody. And that feeling is a really hard feeling for me to navigate, especially as a leader. It's something I'm constantly learning. The good news is that all month long on the Global Leadership Podcast, we're going to be delving into this topic of failure. Because fear of failure is so often what holds us back as leaders. But at the same time, knowing how to capitalize on the lessons of failure can be one of the biggest catalysts for growth. I know it has been for me, and I'm guessing it has been for you. Just that overcoming that fear of failure. Today, we're talking to David Ashcraft, President and CEO of the Global Leadership Network, and we're going to be chatting about some of our own experiences of failure. David shares a really great story of early on in his ministry that you're definitely going to want to tune into. And I also talk about a really personal time where I messed up and had to call David, my CEO, on a weekend, and how we navigated through it. David also shares some really good insights into how he has learned from his failures and move forward to grow incredible organizations. So we're going to dive into this conversation, but just before we get into the interview, I want you to know that David and I really want to get to know you and learn how this podcast is growing you as a leader. David and I have been hosting for a few months now, and you've gotten to know a little bit about us, our highs and our failures, and we haven't gotten to know about you. So here's how you can help. I thought we would make getting to know one another just a little bit of fun. I love fun. Would you send us a review? And in it, would you tell us your name and what you're learning? And if you do, you will be entered into a giveaway to receive a free GLS 25 ticket. Honestly, we will love reading all about you, and giving you a free gift is a perk. That's it. We can't wait to hear from you. David and I can't wait to read your notes. Now let's lean into failing well. David, welcome.
Hello, Whitney. Good to see you today.
It's good to see you today, too. I'm glad to get to be with you, and we're going to talk about a really fun topic. You ready for it, David?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Well, I mean, depending how you think about it, it could not be fun, but isn't
It may not be a fun topic. Okay.
Yeah. It's failing well. That's what we're going to be talking about today, David. Okay.
Failure. I know failure, so that's good.
David, surprisingly, so do I. So we have that in common. Okay, well, we'll talk about it. I can't wait to kind of just get your wisdom, pick your brain, and really learn from you and what you've seen over your years in ministry and leading so many others, David, about the importance of failing and failing well. So to kick us off, David, did you ever have a project, idea, or goal that you were really passionate about that actually failed?
Well, and I had to ask you for a definition of failure, Whitney, though,
Okay.
because I could think back through some things in ministry where I go, oh, that did not work the way I expected it to. And some people might define it as failure. I remember back when I first started at LCBC, and we were transitioning away from Wednesday night prayer meetings and Sunday night gatherings. And so we were trying all different kinds of things. And one of the things we did on Wednesday night, which I thought was amazing, we called it 1 hour with God. And you essentially went into the auditorium, there was music playing, the lights were low. We would put words up on the screens for an hour, just kind of guiding you through 1 hour with God. And I still think it's one of the best things we did, and we never had more than five people show up for it. So it probably was a huge failure as far as the number of people turning out. But we learned from it, I learned from it, and I enjoyed it. So we did it for one summer, and then after nobody showed up, we quit doing it. So I suppose that would be labeled as a failure.
Yeah, but you loved it and you learned from it, and there probably is something a lot inside of that, David. I'd even been curious too, how did you move through the discouragement? Did someone coach you in that space to say, hey, David, we're going to have to move forward, nobody's coming to this? How did you face that discouragement of that?
Well, we were again small at that time, and so I was doing everything. So I was the light guy, the sound guy, the set the room up guy, turn the lights off and lock the doors guy, and so I was doing all of it. And on one hand, it's funny because again we were moving away from the traditional Wednesday night prayer time and going more with small groups and things, and so I suppose God answered the prayer because nobody showed up, and so then it was easy to cancel it. Come fall because nobody's coming anyway. So outside of me, nobody was disappointed.
You were enjoying your 1 hour with God.
Exactly. My time of solitude. So,
Oh, I love that so much. But, so helpful to just even recognize, you did learn, and there is an essence, like that is defining failure is how we get to learn from that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
And I think perspective is important too, Whitney, because perspective-wise, on one hand, I look and go, that was a terrible failure. The other, there were some positives that came out of it. And like I said, we were moving away from one thing, and so it allowed me to shut the doors to what we were moving away from pretty easily. And so it's all a matter of perspective as to whether it was truly failure or not.
Absolutely. And David, one thing that's going to be really neat about this season of the podcast is, so all month long in November, we're going to be studying failure. And we got to hear from Amy Edmondson on the summit stage, and that was fantastic. And we have a podcast episode with her coming up in the month. So
Good.
Listeners, get ready. It's going to be really fantastic to get to learn from her. One thing that Amy said is we must shift from expecting perfection to expecting progress. And I hear that a little bit in that story. David, I'm curious, do you see yourself as a perfectionist, or how have you learned from that?
Well, I would describe myself, Whitney, as being fairly calculated when I try things. And so I'm real open to failure, but I want to do all the planning that I can so that it minimizes the opportunity for failure. And so try new things, but just try them wisely. Perfection, maybe not, because if you wait for perfection, you're never going to move and you're never going to try anything, thus you'll never fail. So it's trying new opportunities, but trying to minimize the pain of the failure or the impact of the failure as much as possible.
That makes sense. I see that calculation in you, just working alongside you, and it's really wise. So you're at LCBC, you're kind of a one-man show. You and Ruth are doing so much work there. And then LCBC obviously grows. Can you talk about, now you're not the only one making the decisions. You have a whole team alongside you as your church is growing. Maybe you're navigating some failures along the way. I know you really appreciate candor, David. Can you talk about how as a team you've developed candor to have healthy conversation to say, hey, maybe this isn't working, you guys, we need to adapt or flex. How do you build that inside of teams so that people can actually be flexible towards how the project is moving?
Yeah, probably for us. I don't know that we set out to say, let's be an organization full of candor. But what we did do is every time we would do something, any type of new program or new gathering, anything, we're always giving feedback. And so every weekend, after the first Saturday night gathering, we gather on the stage and we give feedback. It could be called critique, but we critique or give feedback to the message, to the songs, to the announcements. Everything we do, we have feedback. And so we're a high feedback culture. And so I think that even helps in the area of failure because first of all, you're going to face that feedback. And I think it makes you plan even a little bit more, anticipating the feedback. But then it also gives you opportunity to say, you know what, that didn't go so well. And so let's talk about why it didn't go well. And so we try to play nice and be as nice as we can when we give that feedback. But if we need to have hard conversations, we're used to it because we do it all the time.
That's helpful, the difference between, because some people candor, that might elicit some emotion inside of them, but really the word feedback is helpful. David, you may not know this about me, but I'm a huge people pleaser. And so sometimes candor feels like, oh my gosh, you're attacking me. I'm just being totally honest. And so it's been a muscle I've had to learn to lean into. Is there any of that inside of you at all? Or have you always been able to hear people's feedback and kind of adapt to it?
I'm sure there's a little bit of that in me, but it's a real little amount. And Ruth would say there's not much at all there, but it's there. I want people to be happy with me, but more than that, I want whatever I'm doing to be successful. And so I'm okay with people giving me harsh feedback if it's not going well, or even if it's gone real well in my eyes. So like the 1 hour with prayer when nobody shows up, for me, I loved it. And so it was a success for me. And people could have criticized it and say, well, it didn't work. And they're right, it didn't work, but I'm okay with that. It was trying something new. And so even as we've gotten larger as an organization, being okay with that kind of feedback. And I have to be, I can give feedback to other people, but I have to be open to it myself too. And so in our church, everybody knows we're going to give it, we're going to get it as well. You're going to receive it, and we know to say it kindly. This isn't to be harsh, and you want to fill gaps with truth as opposed to with grace, as opposed to suspicion and doubt and things like that. If somebody really messes up and they did not prepare well, then that's when it's probably a little bit more of a difficult conversation. If somebody tried and they can show me, here's all the things that we did to prepare to make sure this was going to go well, it just didn't, then I'm totally okay with that. If somebody comes in unprepared and they did not plan and they did not set things up well, then it's going to be a different conversation.
Yeah. David, I want to actually share a personal story of getting to interact with you on this because, and it actually is exactly what you just said, and listeners are going to hear this and understand because, again, we're all going to make mistakes. And what you just mentioned, there's a difference between a calculated failure, something that you weren't necessarily planning for, and then something that you didn't have control over. So I actually called you on a weekend, didn't I, David, and said, oh my gosh, David, I messed up. And I just want to say, your response inside of that, and this is where leaders can really lean in and learn. You didn't raise up all these red flags and take a big gasp, David. You said, thanks for telling me, and let's create a solution together. There's so much learning inside that, David. I learned from your leadership in that. So just number one, thank you for that experience. And have you always approached scenarios like that where, hey, yes, this is a problem and let's create solutions? Or is that something that you've learned along the way?
I've probably been that way for the most part. That's just my temperament. But Whitney, it's totally different. If you tell me that you messed up, then I probably respond very differently than if I discover you messed up and you messed up a while back and you just didn't tell me or you were hiding it from me. Then it's going to be probably a different response that way. And so, I think just being willing to acknowledge that I made a mistake, that something didn't go right, then I can be very, very gracious. But if you try to cover it up and then I find out, that's usually not quite as gracious a response, I would guess.
Yeah, well, lots of little learnings there with failing well. And we'll kind of wrap here, David. So Carrie Lorenz, who was also a summit speaker for us, one thing that she said, and gosh, this is so important, and actually the team that I work alongside, we talk about this quite a bit. She said, failure is not the enemy, inaction is. So with the fear of failure being such a huge factor for us that can keep us from taking actions, what encouragement would you give to the leader listening today about a dream or a goal that they might have and how they might be afraid of just even trying? What would you encourage them in?
Well, so I'll tell you what we face all the time at LCBC now, because we've got a staff of 300. I would say 200 of them are under 30 years of age. And so they oftentimes will say, oh, we don't try to fail enough. And so I'll even back up a step and say, it feels like in leadership circles, there was a time, and still is out there now, where if you're not failing, you're not moving forward, you're not winning. You've got to go out and you've got to fail a lot. And one of the things I appreciate about Amy Edmondson when she spoke at the summit is she's like, that's not necessarily true. You don't want to just go out and fail foolishly. You want to be wise about your failures. And so what I constantly would say to our team is, we can fail, but let's just be careful with it. And so we have 22 campuses. And so we can try something at one campus that we think is a good idea. Let's try it in an incubator kind of situation or a more of a closed situation. So if it fails, we didn't affect all 22. We just affected one. And so let's try things and learn from it. And so I think it's Jim Collins, Whitney, that says, fire BBs at first instead of cannonballs, and just saying, if you're going to try something, try it, but make it calculated and try it smaller so that you're not going to damage the entire organization. And so with the idea of you've got to fail or you're not succeeding, you could be stupid in your failure and you can blow up the whole organization, and you could blow up an organization the size of LCBC or the size of the GLN if you're not careful. And so you've got to be wise and say, let's try things, but let's not try things that are going to totally destroy the organization. So I would say to pastors or leaders, go ahead and try things, but just be wise about it and make sure you think through the consequences. What are you trying to accomplish with it? What do you expect the results to be? And then I'm trying to think somebody had a quote that if you can live with the worst of what you expect, then go for it. But just make sure that you know how bad it could be. And if you're okay with that, then go for it. But at least think it through. And so be calculated as you're moving forward towards potential failure. Hopefully you're going to win, though.
That is really great advice. So even just as leaders are listening, thinking about that dream, either personally or organizationally, David, what I hear you saying is take a step, just think it through all the way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of the people that are dying, so this is going to sound harsh, people that are dying taking selfies next to a cliff. It's like, think about what you're doing before you go too far out on that cliff to take that selfie, and is it worth it, and what do you expect to happen when you're hanging out there? And so it's those kind of things, yeah.
I think that's a great, that is the visual that people need to leave with, David, where they're thinking, okay, I really do need to think this through before I start it in my organization or it impacts my family or my friendships. David, thanks so much. This is really helpful. And I know leaders will be able to hopefully approach failure just a little bit differently just because of this conversation. So thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks, Whitney.
That talk with David on failure was so meaningful. I think anytime that you can talk about failure, it really just brings out like the people inside of us as actual people. We become real because everybody messes up. And so even getting to tell that story between me and David and how David reacted to my mess up and the journey through that, I hope that just gives you insight into how really great leaders can notice a mistake and navigate through it and even build through it. That was actually really incredible to get to share with you guys. I know that my highlight that I'm going to be thinking through is when David talked about, the term that he used was he created a high feedback culture. I want to do that with my team. I want to create a high feedback culture. The other thing that I'm really excited to try, that I think I could try in my home actually, as well as in my team and at the GLN, is when David was talking about, listen, dream the thing, innovate the work, but just when you test it and try it in a smaller capacity so that it doesn't impact the whole. I can apply that in my home with my family, and I can also apply that to my team where we can say, gosh, wouldn't it be great to actually implement XYZ? And then certainly we could, but what if we tested it in a smaller capacity before moving it to the big show or whatever it is that we're implementing? So I'm going to be thinking about those things. I'm definitely going to be trying them, and I'm going to give myself permission to fail well. What about you? What aspect of failure do you need to inspect a little bit closer? Is there maybe a feeling that you have around failure or your reaction to failure that you need to tweak or overhaul? I wonder if you could think about that. I wonder if you could give yourself just a little bit of space to think about it. And if you're curious and you think, you know what? This still makes my stomach turn a little bit. I do want to lean in more to failure. That's so great. So we have resources for you. All month long, we are talking about failing well over at our 365 resource. So just go make sure to check it out, globalleadership.org/365. And hey, as always, friends, thanks for joining together with us as leaders. And remember, when the leader gets better,